In this week's podcast, I'm with Professor Emmeline Taylor, and we're going through an update on how retailers can tackle and bring down the cost of staff dishonesty in their business. Hey, look, I did want to check in with you on staff dishonesty or internal theft, and I wanted to do that because it does seem very much top of mind with a lot of retailers right now that we speak to in our community of 400 or so, and it's really popping up there. And I think it's perhaps a good thing. It's perhaps not a problem that requires a lot of capital investment. Unlike some of the problems we deal with, like self-checkouts and perhaps shopping trolley theft. Perhaps there's a way of tackling this that doesn't cost an awful lot of money, but it's actually a very complex problem and sensitive. And just wanted to touch base with you just on some of the stuff that we've been doing over the last sort of 6 months or so, just in this podcast, just to, I suppose, get us up to speed with the latest thinking in the space and where we're heading in terms of new research. So just start us off by maybe just taking us through, what do we think we mean by this sort of internal theft, staff dishonesty, and just how do we think about how big it is?
Yeah, so internal theft has always been and continues to be a sensitive topic. It's relatively taboo. We spend a huge amount of time and energy focusing on customer theft, but yet a lot of the data points suggest that internal theft is not that far behind in terms of the level of losses and shrinkage that is attributed to it. But first of all, what is internal dishonesty? And I think this is really key because nowadays we've seen quite a diversification of how this manifests. It's no longer somebody, helping themselves to a sandwich at lunchtime or taking something that was broken and then using it themselves. There's a whole range of ways that of course still happens, but there is of course a misappropriation of cash and tangible assets. There's also manipulating returns, faking voided items, changing labels, the misuse of discounts and sharing them with friends and family. There's so many ways that this shows itself. But I think two really key developments in recent years around e-commerce have begun to make this even more complex. So buy online, pick up in store, BOPIS, buy online, return in store, BORIS, is creating further opportunities for collusion, maybe even coercion at times. And I don't think we necessarily know enough about the offender profile, who's doing this, how are they doing it, and how do we plug those vulnerabilities. But you mentioned, just how big an issue is this? And in the report that ECR will be publishing shortly, we pulled together some of the recent survey findings. So, some caveats around that. These are based on industry surveys, but some of the figures are really quite shocking. So, for example, in Australia, 24% of losses are attributed to internal crime. In New Zealand, it's 32%. And then in the UK, 40% of thefts. So noticing that there's slightly different measurements on this, but 40% of thefts are being attributed to internal. There's also other data points that suggest internal thieves also steal at a higher value than external thieves, some saying up to 4 times on average per incident compared to an external thief. So there certainly needs to be more attention on internal theft. And I think there's some low-hanging fruit that could be looked at to begin to, encourage employees to be more honest.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, if you think about the numbers you just said, that could be an extraordinary high value associated with internal theft. But whenever I talk to retailers, they sort of say, well, we only really catch a small part of that, maybe 2% perhaps of what they think is happening are they able to detect. And that could either mean that their current systems for detecting those internal cases, whether that's relying on a sort of whistleblower line or whether that's a sort of analysis of EPOS behaviours or maybe even other um, rules that they can set up in their system aren't working hard enough, or that, this is really difficult to detect, and detecting skimming from a sort of a lorry, the truck driver taking off 2 or 3 items just for themselves, and stores not checking. How big a problem is that? Collusion, self checkouts. When you've now got, someone once said when self checkouts were introduced, you had, previously you had one person who was, sweethearting all the time, and now that person can sweetheart 4 people at a time. What a
Yeah.
great multiplier effect that is. So, what's this thought about this big gap? Do you see that as well? Is that something that you've come across in your discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, pulling together some of the industry figures and beginning to look at, those apprehensions, the number of internal cases that are identified and proceeded against, you very quickly realise that they are a drop in the ocean compared to the scale of activity. So just crunching the numbers in terms of, the typical levels of shrink, how much is attributed to internal, the average case value of an incident, you can begin to see the scale of this problem. And looking at that, it's estimated that probably only around 2% of internal thieves are actually detected, and then any sort of action taken based upon that. So what do you do with the other 98%? How do you appeal to them and try and reach them? And so there was a great ECR study on this.
Yes. Well, I mean, certainly communication, and we'll come on to that, is one of them. I mean, but also just how you recruit. And again, I think that changed dramatically during COVID. I think I remember hearing you tell stories of old when you tried to get a job, yourself, and how was it Pizza Hut or something? They caught you out in an interview or something. Maybe they didn't catch you out, but those sort of, I guess, integrity tests that perhaps used to happen face to face. Maybe they don't happen anymore. Much more online recruitment. Maybe the general store manager is not involved in. And of course, you just got to get bodies, especially at peak time. So as long as they got 4 arms or 2 arms and 2 legs, happy days. And some of the background checks probably don't. It's hard. So
it's really challenging, and especially as you say, those peak times where you're having to recruit thousands of people at pace. I think sometimes some of those processes are missed in terms of background checks, whether the psychometric testing that I did at Pizza Hut that I told you about that unfortunately I didn't pass, obviously long time ago. Let's not dwell on that.
You didn't inhale.
But there's a whole range of different ways that retailers are trying to deter and then detect potential offenders. So through surveillance and monitoring, randomized screening, or screening the whole workforce as they leave a shift, exception reporting. There's all these tools at people's disposal, but the thing with internal theft, it's not specific to any role. It doesn't matter whether you've worked in the business for 1 day or 20 years. We see examples right across different levels of seniority and all different roles of people being dishonest. So it's very difficult to target interventions. Now, there are some successes, and the difficulty is as well is it's always hard to know just how many people were deterred, because you can't measure what didn't happen. But you could when you bring in a new intervention and then compare it to what was happening previously. But a really cost-effective way that this project that was run at Loughborough University looked at was whether concepts taken from marketing and criminology could be applied to signal to the 98% that the business has eyes on them and they have ways of knowing whether there is dishonest practice taking place. And what was interesting from this project is that it wasn't necessarily punitive. It wasn't, we're going to find you and clamp down on you. It was more appealing to people's morality, to their sense of family in terms of, their work family and their colleagues, and then thinking about the potential of what they might have to lose, and is it really worth taking that sandwich, and then potentially, the reputational damage or the loss of employment that might follow. So I think this is quite an exciting space. I think we've moved on from those posters. It just become part of the wallpaper. And so I think maybe having a rejuvenated way of looking at marketing and communications could actually be the tipping point for some of those 98%.
Yeah, and if I just go back to some of your points about criminology, I think I remember the sort of like the sort of spectrum of of criminology. Everyone can be a criminal if they're presented with the right opportunity, the low likelihood of being caught, and rewards, and no sanctions. And retail is pregnant with opportunity. People working late at night, working past their shifts, doing an extra shift, and so removing that opportunity, I think, is going to be really hard for retailers to put into practice. So I suppose that perhaps puts to your point here about the role of communications to sort of be like a speed camera, just to remind people that hey, you could get caught here, and a set of eyes watching over you. Yeah, well, I think in the report we're going to put some examples from the students. I'm not sure we'll ever see those exact artist impression or posters in reality, but we hope that they can inspire some of the retailers. Well, I mean, I guess what's the best case scenario from in your mind, from where the research takes us next?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think it's about trying to revitalize those conversations about internal theft and recognize just what a huge problem it is, and it does deserve to have more attention. And the whole range of different solutions that can be used, from training staff, from having, hotlines, or, all these different technological ways that have been introduced to deter and detect where there is dishonesty. What I'm excited about, though, about this particular project is not only, revisiting and revitalizing those conversations, it's about whether this could make a difference. And the scope is huge, because if we think 98% of incidents are not detected, well, even if you just change 2% of your workforce, that's a big win when you then look at the average value of these cases, and when you look even bigger at the picture of the costs that internal theft is causing businesses.
Yeah, you make a really good point, which is that this last point about recording it, because I don't think you could go onto Google Scholar and find out what is the impact of communications on staff dishonesty. I think you can look at wages and other things like that, but I don't think there's any real evidence out there to support communications. And of course, that makes it really easy for senior managers who are very trusting of their staff to say, well, we don't need to do this because there's no financial benefit. We just upset more people to make it harder to recruit people. So let's keep away from this, this stuff. We're a great place to work, and I think if we can, if you like, bookend the point, internal staff dishonesty communications along the lines of watching over you and family, that makes an impact on the bottom line as measured by the shrink results.
Yeah.
Then perhaps we might sort of stop, not using communications, if you like.
Exactly. And there's been a whole range of studies within criminology that have evaluated the effectiveness of having posters and communication campaigns. And one of the key ones found that simply having a pair of eyes can change behaviour for the positive. And so it was found that bike theft was hugely reduced at a university campus when they had this big poster overlooking the bike racks. It's also been shown to encourage people clearing their tables in a canteen, people putting their doggy poop bags in the bin. There's a whole range of ways that it can be used to nudge people to do the right thing in the moment. But I think translating it into retail, it's really about the messaging, the optics of this that those in the boardroom will be concerned about. But when I speak to staff, one of the issues that comes up, it's not that they feel that these posters would be pointing the finger at them, but it gives them support that if they see somebody else doing wrongdoing, they feel more comfortable that, oh, okay, so that is wrong. There's a clear message around it. And now I feel more empowered and more comfortable to alert, senior staff or to do something about it. So I think it's actually about empowering your workforce rather than pointing the finger.
Wow, what a great point. Yeah, that's really, really powerful. Well, look, hopefully we're going to get in the next 12 to 18 months a tsunami of test control store experiments on communications in all different forms that will allow us to sort of say with some degree of certainty. And we have got, to your point, there is evidence out there already from outside. There is some sort of experiments that we've learnt of that have made some difference. 15%, I think, was one of the examples. But to get that tsunami of testing control experiments out there would be really good for us, and something we could write up and put in the documentation around this particular topic. But for now, thank you very much, and safe travels, or welcome back if you're whatever.
I've been in God already.
That's a time zone. Weird one. Anyway, enjoy. Thank you very much, Emily.
Thanks, Colin.
Bye. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the ECR retail loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast, and if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.